What's up, everyone? Welcome to my channel. I am DJ, aka Token Black. I'm here for the first time. Do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe button. Truly appreciate it. So yeah, this channel has been like a variety channel. I talk about all kind of stuff on here, whatever I'm kind of interested in the time. And recently I've been kind of like on the side, kind of like going down this rabbit hole of this thing called the SCP Foundation, SCP stuff. And it's quite interesting to me. It's like this paranormal, like the secret agency that deal with like this paranormal stuff, and there's different classes of SCPs. And I figured I'll start watching. So I found this video called the SCP Foundation Explained. So I guess it'll give me a little more in-depth, explanation of the SCP Foundation. I did see there's some fan-made films that I'm going to get into, and I listened to a podcast that has been having these stories of SCP, and it's very interesting. It's like an X-Files kind of like, kind of thing. X-Files and like, what's that show? Fringe, those kind of like weird stuff and everything. And but yeah, I love X-Files when I was a kid, so this kind of interested me. So let's check this out. Get an explanation of the SCP Foundation, and then I'll start watching some more videos and checking some more stuff out on the channel. It's one of the things I'm into, but let's check it out. The SCP Foundation Explained. Here we go.
In an undisclosed location, a woman is being tortured. The methods of her abuse are too horrific to be described, and her torturers are death row prison inmates, the absolute worst of the worst. This woman's torture is constant, and procedures are put into place to make sure she never becomes accustomed to the pain. If ever her torturers express sympathy toward their victim, their superiors will have them removed and replaced. If they try to rescue her or put her out of her misery, they themselves will be shot without hesitation. The woman being tortured is known only as
the SCP
231-7, and worst of all, she's pregnant. The cause of her eternal torture? The SCP Foundation. And you'll be shocked to learn that when all is said and done, these are the good guys, because if they ever stop their brutal treatment of SCP-231,
so that's what I've like from like my little couple weeks of rabbit hole venture down this SCP Foundation thing. Is like they're doing the job that kind of like behind the scenes, like Men in Black kind of situation, where if it got out to the public would be complete hysteria and stopping like the big stuff from happening. And they do some like real shady stuff on top of that from the stuff I've heard, read, and listened to so far. But let's see what else they explain to us.
1-7, a treatment codenamed Procedure 110 Montauk. She'll give birth to a creature that will destroy the world as we know it. This is just one of the many examples of the objects and entities under the watchful eyes of the SCP Foundation, a mysterious group that strives to achieve greater good by any means necessary.
Yeah.
We do mean any. What you're about to hear is above classified, and be warned,
above classified.
what is heard can never be unheard, unless, of course, the Foundation gets its hands on you. So what is the SCP Foundation? In the most basic sense, the group's mission statement is right there in the SCP
protect.
Secure,
I did not know that part.
It's the task of the Foundation to, in their own words, contain
it makes sense. The podcast always says that.
Phenomena, things that don't make sense, things that don't belong, things that simply don't fit in with our perception of reality, and some things that pose an existential threat.
Yeah, I listened to the IKEA one. That was kind of weird.
These contained
I'll never go look at IKEA again.
Each of
the
which
same
is
way.
accompanied by a number. This is a broad umbrella, as an SCP can range from benign or even actively helpful to downright apocalyptic if ever released. Much like the infamous Men in Black often reported by witnesses in connection with alien sightings, the Foundation works in secret to maintain a sense of
That's why it's kind of like the Men in Black kind of thing.
Knowing the chaos it would cause if any of the anomalies they're harboring ever become public. Take, for example, SCP-500. To the untrained eye, the object is just an unassuming prescription pill bottle, the kind you'd see in medicine cabinets the world over.
These are the weird ones. There's a coffee machine. That one's weird.
They can cure quite literally anything, from cancer to a cold, within 2 hours. But at the time of this writing, there are only 47 pills left. The power to cure all disease, a privilege denied to even the richest and most powerful in society. A veritable holy grail. Can you imagine the violence and horror that would break out in trying to obtain their existence?
That makes sense.
Public? The SCP Foundation works in secret because the collective mind of society just couldn't handle the knowledge of what they're dealing with. They work with the approval of all world governments, effectively placing them above international law. Essentially, there is no human authority above the Foundation, because without the Foundation's work, there would be no humans left to govern. To understand the basic operations of this above
That's
top
like
secret organization, we need to delve a little further into that secure, contain,
way
protect
above like
slogan.
top secret and like,
Secure
you know,
refers to the
spooks and
Foundation's
everything.
practice of constant global surveillance and observation in order to detect and intercept anomalous activity before it can interact with civilians or rival groups. Contain
I like how they do their
preventing
graphics
the effects or
in the
influence of the
infographic show.
anomaly from spreading by either, in their own words, relocating, concealing, or dismantling such anomalies, or by suppressing or preventing public dissemination of knowledge thereof. The latter can involve practices such as using advanced chemical compounds or technologies to delete and then rewrite the memories of infected
Kind of like
civilians,
the
or even
neuralizer
committing mass
from
murder
Men in
if
Black.
necessary to cover their tracks. The SCP Foundation has, in the past, wiped out entire towns of innocent civilians
Wow.
to prevent dangerous information about the SCP
Well, I guess so,
spreading
yeah.
beyond their control. They can take lives at their own discretion and
What?
consider almost any crime to be permissible when the alternative is Armageddon. And finally, protect pertains to all operations meant to protect mankind from the
Without
SCP,
contain, okay.
up to and including neutralizing and destroying them when possible. Some SCPs, such as the infamous SCP-682,
Okay, I've heard that one.
indestructible genocidal reptilian, have proved to be almost impossible to destroy. Research is ongoing in many cases as the Foundation explores any and all possible methods of reducing the threat.
This would be a
before
good like TV
dangerous
show.
SCPs,
It's like
in order to help
SCP
them categorize
Foundation.
the
It's like
thousands
have
of
like little
strange and horrifying
every episode be
anomalies under their
different,
watch.
dealing with
The Foundation has created
different
a system
SCPs.
that organizes the SCPs based on the difficulty of containing them. The first of the primary object classes is safe, pertaining to SCPs that require little, if any, resources to safely and properly contain. Examples include the previously mentioned SCP-500 pill bottle and SCP-999, a benevolent blob of gelatinous orange
the
matter.
hell?
SCP-999 has a playful, almost dog-like personality. It causes feelings of happiness and euphoria in whoever or whatever it touches.
What's wrong with him?
It's even been used by the Foundation as a pacification tool to reduce aggression in other SCPs. The second primary object class is Euclid, which refers to any anomaly that requires more resources
Euclid?
to contain completely or where containment isn't always reliable. This is the broadest SCP class, and the majority of sentient, sapient, or autonomous anomalies fall into this category. A Euclid SCP might be something as huge, sprawling, and bizarre
I
as
missed what the first class was called.
SCP-3008. This SCP appears to be a kind of anomalous pocket dimension hidden inside an IKEA superstore.
That's the one I
which
heard
is
about.
Not only significantly larger on the inside by approximately
But it's like
10
little
kilometers,
evil,
it
like-
also contains bizarre, faceless
Yeah.
entities which can become hostile under the right conditions. A Euclid SCP can also be something as seemingly innocuous as SCP-294,
The podcast I listened to, they
which
did like
appeared
a
to the untrained eye
reenactment
to
of that
be a
one. It was
standard
really
coffee
good.
vending machine. However,
one too, I've heard this
unlike
one.
any other coffee machine, the input system on SCP-294 is a QWERTY keyboard. This SCP can manifest any liquid typed in on the keyboard, from standard drinks like coffee and beer to more esoteric compounds like sulfuric acid and disease-infected human blood. During extensive tests, one subject requested the perfect drink and was given an odorless lavender-colored liquid. After consuming the liquid, the subject went into a state of euphoric shock. The subject later committed suicide, leaving a note which read, "I'm sorry, but at this point everything's just one big letdown." Sadly,
What?
subjects dying during
So like the podcast I listened to the one about the IKEA and about the coffee machine, but it's like a what do you call it, like an audio book kind of style where they act it out, and it's really good. I got to think the name of it, but it's on Spotify. But it's like an SCP, and it's come up like the first one. But yeah, I've heard those two stories because I was in that podcast. But yeah,
tests is not uncommon. The SCP Foundation essentially has limitless resources, including access to countless disposable workers and test subjects.
That's
most
the
common of
prisoners?
these are so-called D-class personnel, which are death row inmates conscripted for
Yeah.
the purposes of often lethal SCP experimentation or containment. The next primary object class is Keter, described by the Foundation
Keter.
as anomalies that are exceedingly difficult to contain consistently or reliably, with containment procedures often being extensive and complex. This can
lizard.
either be due to being an extremely volatile and dangerous anomaly or just one that seems to defy known laws of physics or reality, and is thus extremely difficult to understand or contain. The SCP
Keter.
Foundation has a vast number of secret facilities across the globe, and while the Keter-class SCPs are not nearly as common as the Euclid class, they consume a great deal more resources to safely contain. One particularly terrifying Keter-class SCP is SCP-354, colloquially known by the Foundation employees as the Blood Pond. This SCP is a large pool of non-biological red liquid discovered in North Canada that appears to be a kind of interdimensional primordial soup. What makes
What?
this SCP particularly hard to contain,
The
as
hell?
well as extremely frightening, is the fact that hostile entities periodically emerge from the pod and must be neutralized before they can escape the containment area.
Yeah,
These
so but
entities have included a floating black sphere that can fire concentrated beams of deadly radiation, a
What the
15-foot
hell?
tall reptilian humanoid that seemed immune to gunfire, and a homicidal metallic humanoid nicknamed the Terminator by Foundation personnel. The most highly classified primary
the
object
hell,
class
man?
of all is Thaumium, which consists of SCPs used to contain other SCPs. This can range from SCP-7000-J, a book of Latin incantations bound in dinosaur skin that can summon various other
Dinosaur
entities,
skin?
all the way to SCP-4006, which is the entire state of Massachusetts.
What?
Thaumium-class SCPs are the most
Anyway, from
bizarre and
Massachusetts?
esoteric of the anomalies.
Why is
dealt
that
with
an
by the Foundation,
SCP?
but thankfully, they
I
often
gotta
pose
find that
less of
story.
an active threat than many of the Euclid or Keter class SCPs.
Anybody from
Finally, as
Massachusetts,
mentioned
let me
earlier,
know.
Sometimes the SCP Foundation deems an anomaly too dangerous to contain and just needs to destroy it entirely. A terrifying example of a neutralized SCP and a perfect illustration for just how strange and abstract the anomalies dealt with by the Foundation can be is SCP-4991. This SCP manifested as a series of bizarre posts across a number of websites about an
What?
apocalyptic event that seemed to be occurring on a different layer of reality and seemed to indicate that a kind of deadly parasitic and carnivorous insect was spreading like wildfire across the globe, causing death and destruction in their wake. The SCP Foundation neutralized SCP-4991 by
Ow.
tracking down, containing, and erasing all infected posts across the internet before it could spread too far. Who knows what would have happened if the Foundation hadn't intervened? As is often the case with SCPs, it's probably best just not to think about it.
There's just
The
so many
actual
different types
structure
and
of the
strange
SCP
stuff that they come up
Foundation is
with.
Surprisingly transparent.
Who
with
started this,
personnel
like the
classification
SCP?
levels ranging from Class A to Class E. Class A personnel are considered vital to the strategic operations of the Foundation and therefore are not allowed to be in direct contact in any way with any of the SCPs due to potential risks. Class B personnel are vital to local Foundation operations on SCP test sites and are only permitted to be in contact with SCPs deemed to be relatively safe. Class C personnel are field agents that have far more direct contact with the SCPs and often put themselves at great risk in doing
Man.
so. Class D
You wanna be a
personnel,
B or
as
better.
previously mentioned, are essentially cannon fodder thrown into the jaws of death to discover more about the more dangerous anomalies on the SCP roster. And finally, Class E personnel are personnel that have been already exposed to the potentially dangerous effects of an unknown
What?
anomaly. Class E personnel are placed into quarantine until they're deemed fit to return to work or terminated, depending on the results of their
Terminated,
observations.
wow.
In terms of actual roles in the SCP Foundation, the top of the pyramid are the O5 council members, Class A personnel who have total
I've heard people
clearance and
talk about
oversee
that,
all Foundation
but you don't know who they
operations.
are.
Below them are site directors, who manage the various physical Foundation facilities across the globe and report back to the O5 Council. On site, researchers and containment specialists work together to better understand and combat the anomalies being housed at their particular facility. They're kept safe by the hard work
No,
of veteran
shark.
security and tactical response officers ready to lay down their lives to prevent more dangerous SCPs from ever escaping and reaching developed areas.
That's
In the
weird.
event that an SCP does breach containment and escape, or a new one is discovered, field operatives are dispatched by the Foundation to get the situation under control. These will consist of field agents who already
I would be a field agent in the SCP. That'd be a pretty cool job, I think. I don't know, maybe. Depending on what SCP I'm dealing with.
operate across the globe, and specialized mobile task force operatives. The SCP Foundation has eyes and ears everywhere. Their organization is influential and is embedded in every facet of society, ready to
I
strike
wonder,
and
is it
suppress an
could
emerging
be real.
anomaly
We could
before
not
any
know about
ripples
this
of
right
its
now.
existence can reach the wider world. Even here, we've only really scratched the surface of the SCP Foundation's extensive and frankly mind-boggling global and historical operations. There's plenty of information about the Foundation online, many of which people assume is pure fiction, but wouldn't that be the perfect cover for a real secret
Yeah, right.
organization wanting to cover its tracks? As the quote says, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist. Ultimately,
That's true.
the SCP Foundation is on the side of mankind, but that doesn't mean it'll always act in our best interests. After all, if it means
I mean-
preserving the peace and getting another anomaly under wraps, the Foundation won't hesitate to terminate you and everyone you know without
Yeah.
a second thought. Whether you'd want to face off against the Foundation itself or one of the anomalies they wish to contain is ultimately up to you.
Yeah, why wouldn't you go
Trust
against
us,
this
neither would
organization that
end
they're
well for
doing
you.
quote unquote
Speaking
good.
of which, there's another SCP we forgot to mention that's quite literally unspeakable. SCP-2521 is a
What?
creature that's made entirely of strange black tendrils that envelop and smother the creature's prey. No written records of the creature exist outside of pictograms because it immediately attacks and consumes any information produced about it. This includes
What?
speech, as the creature will appear and consume anyone who... Oh god. Oh no. It's here. It's here. Help me.
Oh my
Pay no mind
god.
to what you just witnessed. I, the infographics show narrator, am perfectly fine. We now recommend you watch Russian Sleep Experiment Explained and How a Meme Slender Man Became Real. Pay no more thought to what you've just seen or heard. Thank you.
That's funny. Yeah, so like I said, I've dabbled in this over the past, few weeks and everything, and it's very interesting to me. Again, this is all fiction apparently, so we know. But yeah, it's something that I'm getting into. It's kind of fun to deep dive in this. I'm gonna deep dive in it more, and I want to check out some of these fan made films that they made, because I really think this would be a good show. Just it's called the SCP, and just have like every episode be like a different one or whatever, and it'll be pretty cool. But yeah, this stuff is kind of fun to me to watch and everything. It makes you think, this stuff could be real for all we know. We don't know. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below if you've ever heard of SCP Foundation. If you have, leave some, comments on what should I check out next, or any films or SCPs you want me to react to. If you want to see more of this, hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, guys, I will see you when I see you. Peace.